Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Show. I'm so happy you joining me today. Hold on, let me just light my candle. I want to start with a couple of questions because you guys wrote into me and wanted me to do another episode on people pleasing, and that's what we're talking about today. So, do you say yes when you really want to say no? Do you overfunction in pretty much all of your relationships, meaning do more of the work, more of the emotional labor? Are you the one that everyone counts on, but who's really there for you? I mean, do you even let people be there for you? If any of that sounds familiar, you guys, then this episode is for you, my friend. Before we get into it, if you happen to be new to my YouTube channel, well, hello and welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Please introduce yourself in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you get notified when we roll out new stuff, which is every Tuesday and every Thursday. And I wouldn't want you to miss it. You know what I mean? Because I'm actually creating it for you. All right, so let's move into today's episode. So you identified with some of these, right? Saying yes when you want to say no, overfunctioning in your relationships, being sort of the one that's reliable that people can count on, but not really feeling like you have that many people who are there for you. That is someone who is people pleasing, right? So I think that we have to just dispel the myth about people pleasing, that people pleasing isn't being kind, right? It is an act of self-protection. That's why we do it. Because really, people pleasing in a chronic way often stems from a trauma response, especially fear of rejection and abandonment. So I think that a lot of times we like to tell ourselves, and I certainly did, that I was being nice. I did not realize how much of my behavior in my young life was really people-pleasing and that I was always looking for validation outside of myself because of my relationship with my father for a million reasons, right? We all have our reasons as to why we do the things we do, or we end up in these categories of having disordered boundaries or people-pleasing or whatever it is. But I think that we have to really look at the truth of the behavior because it makes it so much easier to transform or change the behavior if we are really being straight up, if we are talking true, as I would like to say, about the behavior. It's really not generosity, people-pleasing. It's a nervous system survival strategy, right? It's like we are trying to just survive, right? So you think about what are the other survival strategies? We have fight, flight, freeze, and then fawn, right? And when you think about fawning, what is that? That is people-pleasing. So for those of you who don't know what it is, fawning basically means like stroking the ego of placating people so that they are not rejecting you or so that they're not mad at you, basically. Have you ever had someone do that to you, meaning they were fawning to you? And it's interesting, when anyone does that to me, I immediately sense it and I don't like it at all. I never liked people sort of, like stroking ego or whatever. I can always feel it doesn't feel honest to me. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just not good at taking a compliment, but I don't think so. I really feel like someone fawning, I can really feel it. So fawning can look like care, but it's actually sort of your fear, your sense of fear, sort of wearing a smile, right? There's fear underneath that behavior. So it's the reflex to please others as a way to avoid perceived danger, right? It's a way of trying to control. When we look at it as emotional self-defense, right, that's what it is. This is not like inherent. This is not like in your DNA or in your bones, right? And it's also not a character flaw. It's like you weren't born this way. You became one this way to stay safe, just as we do as kids. Like, God, thank God, we have this ability to be adaptive to our environment, right? Lucky us that the way we're made as human beings, no one needed to tell us how to do it. We just knew how to do it because our survival instinct is so innate that Nobody needed to send you a memo on how to do it as a kid. Whatever the people pleasing was that was keeping you safe, you were just doing it. And that's all of us. And why I put out these videos about it is because it's not all bad, right? It's like there's so much about what we learn in childhood adaptively that becomes an integral part of our experiences, and we can keep the good stuff and we can get healthier with the dysfunctional stuff, and that will make the quality of our lives so much better. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about with this is how people-pleasing really does equate to self-abandonment, right? So what happens if we really break down when we are in people-pleasing mode? We're disconnecting from our own needs, our own preferences, our own identity to keep others happy, to keep others regulated, right? To keep others feeling good about us. It's like it would be just a natural thing. When I was in my 20s, my late teens and 20s, if I was dating someone, I would literally just take on their likes and dislikes in my own way. It was like this way of not getting pushback from them. If they liked hip hop, me too. If they like country, me too. And listen, I do like a lot of music, but I'm just saying, like, there was certainly a people-pleasing element to the way that I was dating at that time in my life. I was just shape-shifting and turning into what I thought that person wanted me to be, what would make me lovable and desirable to that person. And I think I was so young, I had no idea who I was. So it wasn't like, maybe I'm sure I was self-abandoning, but I didn't even know myself at that point in time, So let's look at some of the behaviors of people-pleasing and sort of what can we do instead, right? So what happens when we, say yes when we want to say no? This is a form of self-abandonment. We end up being resentful. We end up being exhausted. We end up blaming other people for the things we do and don't do. And what about just apologizing all the time? Just assuming that whatever the problem is, it's ours, or whosever fault it is, it's ours. And just endlessly, I see this all the time with my therapy clients, just the over-apologizing. And what does that do? It puts us in this one-down position all the time. If we're always apologizing, we're literally telling other people, I'm wrong. I did something wrong, even when you didn't. Because a lot of times, this over-apologizing is like a social lubricant, right? It's the way that we keep everything smooth sailing socially. But it comes at a really profound cost to us. So we don't want to keep doing it. And then what about the overgiving and the under-asking? It's not just overgiving and undergiving, right? It's from the point of view of the people pleaser. We will automatically give more than a lot of people in our lives, but we are reticent to ask others to help us. And I think that one of the greatest gifts of being older and having a lot of therapy and having done this for so long is it is so satisfying and joyful to ask for help and allow others to help. In my marriage, I obviously let Vic help because, well, maybe it's not obvious, but I do. But that's something that I learned to do with him early on because he's so capable. I mean, he would have to be like ridiculously over the top capable for me to trust that he could do whatever the thing was because I was so untrusting when we met 27 years ago. But that changed something in my nervous system. To be in a relationship with someone who would do what he says he's going to do, who I could ask him. I remember early on in my therapy career, we were up here in upstate New York, 3 hours away from the city. And I had a really rough week, and I used to go into the city where Vic would be up here, and I would be in New York for a couple of days before we got the city apartment. And I remember I was perimenopause. I wasn't sleeping. I was staying at a friend's apartment, and I was just literally having a nervous breakdown. And I just remember calling him, and I was like, I cannot get on a train. Like, I just felt like I couldn't get on an Amtrak train for 2.5 hours. That's the way I would get back and forth to upstate. And he was like, just hold on, babe, I'm getting in the car. And like, for a people pleaser to allow someone, I mean, he drove 3 hours to come pick me up, and I let him, which was extreme. And that was decades ago, which was, that was extremely rare for me. But what did that do for me and for the relationship? First of all, it showed me how much I trusted him, that he would want to. He knew I just was in a bad place, and he just wanted to be a part of my solution. And those are the things that we get robbed of when we under-ask. I would never in my life, if it wasn't Vic, I never would have asked anyone to go out of their way in that way for me. I wouldn't have done it. But I felt so secure in the marriage and so secure with him. And those are the things also, that give and take, that deep give and take, not just give and give as people pleasers do, right? It's the give and take that creates interdependence in relationships, which is so incredibly important. Another thing that is something that I want us to look at is keeping the peace at our own expense. Like, how often are you kind of taking one for the team? And it's still my nature, right? Honestly, it's still my first response to be like, it's not a big deal, whatever the thing is, right? But again, if we are keeping the peace, Cheryl Richardson has this great quote that says, staying silent to keep the peace starts a war within yourself. And you're like, damn, that is so true. Because it's not like it goes away. It's a short-term plan. And all of those, right, these things that we're talking about is some kind of form of self-abandonment, right? Over-apologizing, saying yes when you want to say no, over-giving and under-asking, and keeping the peace at your own expense. All of them have this inherent aspect of self-abandonment. And every time that you abandon yourself to sort of avoid abandoning someone else, you reinforce this belief, this faulty, this limiting belief that your needs don't matter. And that's not true, but many of us walk around. And I think that we have to look at, we all have these original wounds. And what happens with these original wounds in our lives? Like, what if you had a volatile parent, let's say? You learned to be easy because you are trying to stay under the radar if you have a volatile parent, and how all of this impacts our nervous system, right? So what happened if you grew up in a family system where love was conditional? So then you become hyper attuned to everyone's moods, right? Are the conditions good for you to be loved or not? Do you need to shift something about yourself or what you're saying in order to get the approval that you want? I mean, a lot of families, love absolutely was conditional, Maybe being the good one was the only way for you to feel safe. That was certainly true for me. And I guess it could be worse, but so then what does that lead to? Being the good one, well, I felt like I needed to overfunction for everyone else in my family system. I felt like I needed to be a good student and be a good friend, and all this pressure to perform. And in the performance was where I felt safe. But it's exhausting, and especially when you're doing it from childhood. People-pleasing is often the adult mask of a child who was never allowed to take up emotional space. And that's just a true story. If you were not allowed to take up emotional space, a lot of times you don't even know how to do it in adulthood. So I think it's something that we really need to understand where we're doing it. And again, these are all, we're really talking about emotional boundaries. Again, as we did last week, right? It's sort of the same thing. And as I said, Boundary Bootcamp season, one of my favorite topics to talk about, boundaries. Join us if you want to, terricole.com/boundary bootcamp. Anyway, if you feel exhausted, right? But you say yes to the thing anyway, or if your partner's upset and you apologize for their feelings, not for what you did, but for their feelings, right? If you say you're fine when you're not, or you offer to help someone even though you don't actually have the energy to do so, these are all the ways that we self-abandon. And there is a payment, right? There's a payment. The tension that you feel in your body right? That is your body's wisdom being like, hello, we need to do something different. We need to pause. But so much of the time, we just don't listen. Because really, what is the cost of the self-abandonment? Well, resentment, obviously, exhaustion, identity confusion, because if I'm not people-pleasing, who am I, right? As long as I'm pleasing you, I'm okay. But it really moves us far away from our intuition and our truth because we are so outwardly focused when we're doing this. And then you have all of the relationship imbalance that comes from this, right? Yes, the over-giving and the under-asking and the over-giving and the under-functioning, that all over-functioning, under-functioning, that all happens. But also keep in mind that we're like presenting this false self to the people in our lives. So in essence, not to be like a drama queen, but it's true. People love a version of you that may not really, for real, exist. And the real you is so much more interesting. But so much of this is happening unconsciously, which is why we are talking about it. So how do we shift, right? From all of this people-pleasing to more truth-telling, right? Because the real you, as you are, is super worthy. You don't have to be some polished version of you. The real you is interesting. Your uniqueness is what makes you interesting. So let's start with just pausing before you respond to anything, right? I love these questions that I always give you. If someone asks you to do something, you answer these two questions. You ask yourself these two questions before. You say, do I have the bandwidth to do this without becoming resentful? Number 2, do I even friggin' want to do this? Because I feel like so much of the time we don't ask. We do not ask if we want to do it. We just feel like we have to. Second, use your body as a barometer. If something happens and you feel tight, I'm going to say that's a no. If something happens and you feel expansion, I'm going to say that's a yes. And that might sound simplified, but I want to invite you to dial into the wisdom of your body because it is there for you at all times. We just don't listen to it. And I want you to learn the power of pausing in a real way. How about just let me think about it? I have a 24-hour decision-making policy. I'll get back to you on that. There's nothing wrong with simply saying, I'd like to think about that. And you're also teaching people how to treat you when you do that, because it is the small no's and the small pauses that really builds this muscle of discernment around how we're treating ourselves so we can choose to not self-abandon, right? Because I think that we have to look at it that saying no doesn't really push the right people away, right? It filters out the people who like us for what we do for them, which is not necessarily the people we want in our life. You know, if someone needs you to abandon yourself to be in their life, that really isn't love. That's control. That's being used. That's being like utilitarian. But that isn't love. You shouldn't have to abandon yourself. So I think that we really have to, let's leave it on this note of, you don't have to abandon yourself to keep others close to you. It's not required of you. The people who belong in your life, your real people, the people who should be on your VIP section, will welcome the real you, will embrace you changing and growing and evolving, right? Even if you disappoint them sometimes. All of us who have healthy relationships realize sometimes you're going to be disappointed in this relationship, and that is called real life. Real life. That is exactly what that is. So I don't think we want to be going for some perfection because that doesn't exist, right? There is no perfection in relationships because we're all just human beings. So you guys, I'd love to know how this episode of The Terri Cole Show, if it helped you, I hope it added value to your life. Boundary Boot Camp is happening. So join us, terricole.com/Boundary Boot Camp. It is one of my signature courses I have been teaching for over a decade, every single year. We make it better. I take all your suggestions. I love being in community with you and create the most beautiful, sacred community. But if any of what we talked about today in this episode resonated with you, I invite you, check out Boundary Bootcamp. I would love to see you on the inside, and I hope you guys have the most amazing week. And as always, take care of you.